Welcome.
Yeah. So today is Planet-Based Healing, episode 4. We will be focusing on Hemp Centric, brought to you by Project Positive Planets. Joining me is Kim Collier, co-founder of CollierConcepts, Taylor Woods, innovation engineer and co-host on All Things Hemp, and James Stevens, also co-host of All Things Hemp. Today is brought to you by CollierConcepts. So I will just allow you all to introduce yourself. We will start with James.
Excellent. So I'm James Stevens. I guess, lack of a better term, I'm an entrepreneur. I have over 18 years of experience in developing sustainable, natural, and clean technologies. I owned my own firm that I founded. It was called Blue Marble Biomaterials, that developed primarily sustainable and clean label products in energy, and then eventually moved into the CPG, which is the consumer packaged goods space, developing natural and what they call clean label products for companies like Kraft Heinz, Lush Cosmetics, all those to really kind of improve the sustainability and environmental footprint and shift product categories to natural. Last year, I sold that company to a large hemp manufacturer because we were working in the hemp space. And then recently, kind of Taylor and I struck out on our own just because of the changes with everything in the world and all that. And so we've been doing that. My background is microbiology and chemical engineering on top of entrepreneurship. So I'm very kind of technically focused on that side. And we're going to talk about kind of all the cool, innovative stuff that we're seeing and doing in the space around hemp and plant-based solutions.
Fabulous. And Taylor?
Awesome. I'm Taylor. So I've been doing the entrepreneurial thing for pretty sure I'm coming up on 10 years now. And everything I've done to date so far has been on plant-based stuff, whether it was plant-based energy systems, biofuels, biogas, moving into plant-based CO2 and CO2 recovery. And then over about the last 2 years or so, moving into more of the natural products, in particular food, beverage, flavor, and fragrance. And then just most recently, I guess you could say, is over the course of the last year, just really kind of getting started in the hemp space, but then branching out and focusing on all things plant-based, whether that's plastics that we work with and produce. We do a lot of product development, product design, 3D printing, things like that, and a bunch of natural product formulation. So that's kind of the new thing that we're up to. And I would say my background and kind of history of everything, I guess, is more on the engineering and technical side like James, but more on mechanical and then process flow. So I do a lot of the layouts and things like that. And yeah, looking forward to chatting about all the different plant-based stuff, whatever that may be, and having a good conversation this morning, or I guess this afternoon for everyone on the East Coast.
Wonderful. And if I may interject, both James and Taylor represent Montana. The 3 out of 4 of us on the screen are coming to you from the beautiful state of Montana. And I believe James and Taylor both, did you have your education at MSU in Bozeman? Did you meet in college? How did you two connect initially? Because you're definitely a force in the field of hemp and business here in Montana.
So we're actually both out of the University of Montana. Honestly, it was kind of a fluke meeting. I can't even remember how Taylor and I completely first met. It was probably through some other entrepreneur here who was like, oh, do you know something about this or whatever? And then several years ago, Taylor was looking for space when he was doing CO2 recycling stuff. And I had a large facility and I was like, hey, come on in and work out of here. We're really big into supporting other entrepreneurs and figuring out how we can kind of create an ecosystem. I guess kind of that comment about kind of give without expectation, it really does open up a lot more opportunities. So kind of we hit it off during that whole process and then started working together and, you know, innovating together and realized we worked well together.
Brilliant. And for our listeners, just so you know, the latest entrepreneurial collaboration between Taylor and James is their website and their work, and it is called, spell it for me, James, because this is new to me. It's 3.
Yeah. So it's 3 Sickles. So it's the number 3 and then SICKLES.com. And really, that's a focus on kind of a lot of the 3 principles from agriculture and, Zen philosophy and a lot of stuff. And it's really about kind of preparation, organization, and execution on what you're working with. So it's really about initially you set intent on what you're working with. So you need to set your intent. From the intent, you can really start preparing what you want to do. And then honestly, lots of people plan and never execute. And really at the end of the day, execution is the only thing that matters, but it's execution with intent that really drives being able to do like planet-based healing, like you're talking about, or doing things correctly. It's about setting that right, I guess if you use the hippie term, right, it's setting that right energy about what you're doing or the right goals around what you're doing. And for us, it's really about making sure goals are more than just, I want to make a bunch of people rich in Texas or wherever that you're working out of. It doesn't really matter. It's really about what's the impact of what you're working on going to do.
Brilliant. And energy, yes, it used to be a hippie term. It's actually forthcoming in our $4.5 trillion wellness industry globally. One of the trends this year is energy medicine and the recognition of the energetic field of all of us, our energy that we put into the world, the study of the electromagnetic system, the effect of electricity on us. So it's gone from hippie to mainstream, and entrepreneur and creativity and new thought, out of the box thinking is clearly what's going to help us through as we transform and evolve together.
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, one of the biggest things that I've seen out there is, New Age has become a huge trend, not just among fringe groups now. It's one of the most kind of recognized terms and used among the millennials, is they're embracing kind of a lot of New Age, traditions, whether that's aromatherapy, whether that's yoga, whether that's botanical healing. It doesn't really matter. There's really this massive kind of desire to kind of become more aligned with nature. And that even fits kind of how we do a lot of technical development. We're kind of blessed in Montana as well to have biomimicry 3.8 and biomimicry based out of Missoula as well. And really that's about studying nature and looking at nature as a guidepost for everything from, making Velcro and technology and new trains to like how you treat ecosystems and leadership styles and all this kind of stuff. And so what's really nice is we have this really kind of tight synergy in Western Montana that's kind of been this hub and at the forefront of a lot of these ideas and concepts that we're going to talk about today.
Unfortunately, we have some good investors too. We have the energy of money behind the development of these new and most important technologies. Yeah. If you all would like to jump into a bit of the hemp conversation, I wonder if you might be able to share the slide that shows over the 50,000 uses of hemp and breaks down how the plant is used all the way from blossom, bud, leaf, stalk, or heard, right down to the root. And I understand that both of you are working in both of these spaces, or both of you are working in different ways to bring hemp to the forefront. How are you all working in hemp these days?
Yeah, so most of our work these days is really about kind of, a lot of it is actually about validation and studying the economics of this. So really, while everyone talks about, different solutions being a panacea or whatever out there, I think one of the things to remember is kind of when we're talking about sustainability and wellness and all this stuff is it's really about the golden buckshot, not the silver bullet. So I know lots of advocates want to believe that hemp and cannabis is like, it's going to solve every problem. And really what it is it's a tool, or Taylor has mentioned before, I think in previous conversations, it's a feedstock about what we're working with. Is it has definitely the opportunity, but unfortunately, because it was under prohibition for so long in the United States, the infrastructure does not exist to kind of, I guess, tap into the whole functionality or the whole value of the entire supply chain when it comes to hemp. And part of what needs to be done is studying the economics and studying the efficacy of it to really see if it is the right tool for everything that everyone wants it to be the right tool for.
Spoken like a true scientist. Efficacy.
Yeah, and I mean, it really is about efficacy, right? We're doing a clinical trial right now where we're actually, for anxiety and inflammation, we're studying, a combination of hops extract and melissa leaf oil, which is lemon balm, which have scientific evidence that prove they're both anti-inflammation and anti-anxiety in comparison to cannabinoid materials, right? Full spectrum and and THC or broad spectrum hemp extract and really looking at it. And what we're finding is there's actually a lot of botanical solutions that line up very well. And it's interesting to see where the study goes, because there's going to be all sorts of reasons why people don't want to use certain materials. And so giving them choice, and that's a big belief that Taylor and I have, is giving people choice and freedom and being able to pick stuff that will work for them is really good. So doing these clinical studies is great, right? Because we're going to be able to find, where certain things work and how do they work for certain people. And then we can avoid things like interactions and all that. And that's very a science-based approach to it, right? How are we going to make this all work? And like, what are the concerns with one material versus concerns with another? So.
Excellent. Stephanie, are we able to pull up our All Things Hemp slide?
Yes. So we have shared it as a handout, so people are able to download it if they like. And I will share my screen now.
Thank you, Stephanie.
And allow you to talk to the slide.
Brilliant. Many uses of hemp. Over 50,000 documented uses. If you can read this or on your screen to see the 4 color dots, from every part of the hemp plant is usable, from the seeds as well as the bud and the leaf, right into the stalk in the hurd, which is more for textiles as well as the built environment. We have here the leaves, raw cannabis. You're going to see a lot more about that in using the raw leaves. And then references to Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine, the roots for many, many healing modalities as well. And just to be clear, the first paragraph, this is a very important question for our listeners. Is hemp the same as marijuana? It's referencing our last week's interview and chat with Lance Lambert of Greenflower. He very clearly stated, keep in mind you have watermelon with seeds and watermelon without seeds. That's the analogy. It's all the cannabis sativa plant, but you have marijuana, which has the seeds or the THC, and then hemp, which is cultivated or how do we say, it's a different variety with, by law, dry weight less than 0.3% THC in the hemp plant. So
yeah.
Family, they're cousins. Go ahead, Jenna.
I will actually think it's even more confusing than that. Is literally they're not even. It's not even like they're cousins. It's the 0.3 THC is kind of an arbitrary like legal law, and different countries have different amounts of what they'll tolerate in the product. It's all the same plant. It's honestly kind of having like a husky versus a Malamute, right? It's like I think the average person would have significant trouble even distinguishing, the capabilities and what the plant does, other than maybe some, what they call phenotypic things like height or amount of fiber or less amount, without getting really into the chemical analysis of what's going on or the stage of the life cycle of the plant, right? So, a lot of people out there are like, oh, you can get CBD or you can get cannabinoids from any part of the plant or whatever, and really it all comes from the trichome that comes from the flowers on the plant. When you talked about the cannabinoids and a lot of those bioactives, and so I think the real differential between like hemp and marijuana or drug type cannabis or whatever you want to call it is really this discussion about what part of the plant that you're using. I really wish that was where the designations really occurred. Doing industrial hemp versus drug type cannabis, or functional cannabis or medicinal cannabis. There's all sorts of terminology out there, and everyone's offended by one of the terms, right, that you could use. Is really, it's the flower and what you can do with the flower and what's in the flower, and then it's really the rest of the plant when we're talking about industrial hemp and the uses. And so, like, the flower will produce the seeds, but it's still different than the base flower, because as the seeds get produced, the cannabinoid content, CBD, THC, all that stuff kind of dies and goes away with the plant as well too. And so really there's a lot of nuances in there, and it makes the whole thing very, very confusing. But at the end of the day, it pretty much is the same plant. Right. It's just how much THC is there.
I see. And in your work with hemp, gentlemen, please speak to us about your involvement with these different parts of the plant and what you really see is the strength of the hemp plant. All of it, or certain areas of the plant, as you referenced, James. Where are you really focusing, and what do we really need to know first about hemp?
I think the thing that I would like everyone to kind of really understand and know about hemp is the right cultivars or the right strains of hemp are shockingly hardy. And last year and 2 years ago in Montana, we were able to grow massive amounts of, seed and fiber variety of hemp. So that would be seed for oil, for protein, for food, and fiber, which can go into plastics, the textiles, all the things that you're really talking about on that slide. It grew with minimal inputs of fertilizer, minimal inputs of water, minimal inputs of real work in Montana. And that was the exciting part for me, is that when working with the industrial hemp varieties that were approved by the DEA and out of Canada, we were still able to recover functional medicinal compounds from it, right? So we were still able to recover, the CBD that everyone talks about from it, but the rest of the plant could still be utilized for these other activities. And I was really excited on my side of all kind of the crazy bioplastics and fibers and material stuff that we could work with from it. Obviously still significantly more expensive than oil. And in today's day and age, right now where we're talking about negative oil pricing, where effectively oil is free or someone's going to pay you to take it, even harder to compete with, but it shows tremendous promise for the future if the infrastructure can be developed.
Yeah, I think one of the big things when looking at the plant as a whole is just coming to terms with you can't go from 0 to 100 in one step, 1 year, 5 years, even 10 years. Just the main driving force behind that has been that 70-year just gap in time where everything was on pause, so we weren't able to implement new technologies and new solutions when it comes to cultivation, processing, and things like that to try to bring these things more to scale to where they actually can compete with some other competing feedstocks, competing technologies. So one of the things that we always talk with folks about is let's grab the easy fruit, the lowest hanging fruit first. And one of the things I'm more passionate about relative to all the hemp and plant-based stuff is energy, clean energy in particular. So one thing that I always say to folks, and we've done feasibility studies on this, is instead of trying to make an ethanol or a biodiesel or something like that, let's be something a little bit easier, and let's just take the stock after the seeds have been removed or the flour or whatever, and let's process that through into wood chips or a wood chip equivalent, so that could be used in home heating. Technically, if it meets the right specs, it could be used as co-firing for coal or a replacement for that. So that was kind of one of the things that really got me excited about it from the beginning. But the most recent thing that we're actually doing is a lot of work with bioplastics. So taking like a base resin, like a PLA, which is made from starch, and then adding in different materials to make really unique compounds to work with, and then 3D printing that to get customizable and really at the core just really unique stuff that you can't get anywhere else. That's what's been probably the most fun thing recently. So we have, it's 7 3D printers down on the floor right now, various sizes. So we've done resin compounding with wood, hemp, marble, granite, and we're looking at adding in powdered bronze and just kind of seeing how that stuff behaves. And a lot of it right now is just a big marketing thing, just because 3D printing, depending on what it is, isn't great for large-scale manufacturing, like a straw or a fork or a bottle or something like that. But if you want a really unique, Mother's Day is coming up, I'm going to print my mom some cool vase to put flowers in. If you want something super cool like that, that has someone's name in it, or a brand or a company name, that's something that we've been doing a lot of using these compounded resins. And it's just really, really cool to think of something, and a couple hours later it's gone, and then a few hours after that you're actually holding it in your hand and using it. So that's kind of my thing, and just looking forward to starting simple with taking a resin, compounding it, rather than trying to
Taylor,
into this huge plastic.
Taylor, I think there's an issue with your audio. Do you want to try without the headphones or hop back in or out?
And I can do a real quick summary for the listeners or the viewers or however this is working. I can't remember if it's video as well as vocal or not. But really the kind of the summary that Taylor was talking about there is after a low-hanging fruit like a bioenergy solution that he was talking about, the other major project that we're working on is incorporating hemp fiber, hemp materials Even polylactic acid, which is a natural biopolymer made from hemp, is actually getting that incorporated back into 3D printed plastics. And most of that is really what he was talking about, is really about awareness, right? So when we talk about the fact that almost all of plastics manufacturing is now in Asia and not even, even close to the United States, there isn't a lot of infrastructure in the US to get it quickly turned into plastics here yet domestically. However, with doing things like trade shows and marketing and whatever, there's this ability to make high-end kind of bioplastic made material that incorporate hemp into it in a way that gives people's awareness to it, right? So we've 3D printed straws, and we've done holders and placemats, and we've even done masks and all sorts of crazy stuff to kind of get that awareness around the material. And what's really cool is we've even gone further past that on bioplastics, and we can actually take the hemp oil and we can turn it directly into nylon, right? And so that's one of the crazy things we can do, is we can take hemp seed oil and make nylon from it. And it's a different kind of nylon that you're used to, but it can still make everything that nylon works on. And so really what we've been looking at is how do you use that material to do things like prosthetics and kind of some of that kind of stuff there, where it's going to have kind of high functional, almost art combined with the technical solution with it.
And so I heard you say you're using hemp seed oil, and that oil is then being repurposed into many of your inventions and creations, your creative aspects. What about the stalk and the herd and the biomass? Taylor, back to you in energy. Is that really coming forward in opportunities for energy in the built environment, and that strong fiber that we know going back historically is what we've used in during wartime to make rope. The first flag was made of hemp. Betsy Ross, Ben Franklin was an advocate of using hemp as medicine as well as building. So if we go to that sturdy stalk, what else can that be used for in terms of building the built environment and energy production?
We cannot hear Taylor at all.
Oh, Taylor, you're gone.
Maybe sign in and sign back out.
Or check your volume button.
The button at the top.
So to kind of keep the pacing going.
How about this?
Oh, we can hear you now.
All right, I must have accidentally hit mute or something. Anyway, sorry about that. So as far as other uses of the plant, actually, can you just rephrase your question for me?
Rephrase the question. It's still a little bit
Or
different.
repeat it.
There's still a lot of echo with your sound.
Yes.
Yeah, the room I'm in's echoey, so, see what I can do about that.
Yeah. On the fly. Well, just to rephrase the question, briefly stating, with your expertise in alternative energy and looking at the stalk of the hemp plant and its uses historically as a good firm fiber, now we know it's being used in the built environment for hempcrete. But would we also use the stalk in energy production and the biomass of the plant? How will that bring energy possibilities forward?
So the easiest one, and what's going to be, for the most part, the most cost competitive, is to simply take the plant, the stalk part, or whatever's not used, doesn't really matter, whatever will burn, and just grind it into powder and then turn it into pellets, like wood pellets, but hemp pellets. That one, if you look at the numbers, you can actually get up to about $1,000 per acre. Going that way, top line revenue, there's still some expenses and things like that to work in there. But looking at that pathway for essentially thermal power burning it versus like an ethanol or a biodiesel, that's going to be your least resistant path to actually doing something that can actually make a difference in the world. Looking at, those ethanol or biodiesel or things like that, it's unbelievably cost restrictive to do that, comparing it to other biofuel feedstocks, let alone comparing it to, oil or natural gas, depending on what the compound is. So that's what I would say is, from an energy aspect, is take it, grind it, pelletize it, burn it. And what's great from that is if you're, getting multiple harvests a year, it's a lot better than waiting for trees to grow 10, 20, 30, 40 years and cutting those down.
We're doing
Yes.
Go ahead, sorry, Kim.
Question then, continuing this, because that's fabulous. 2 quick questions to you, Taylor. What about the off gas or burning that biofuel, those pellets of hemp? less toxic than using coal or ethanol or any?
It's all, it depends. It depends on where it was grown because it can uptake some of those heavy metals, mercury, arsenic, things like that. And then also on the production process to see exactly what specs they're able to achieve in terms of ash content and things like that that can help reduce particulate emissions. Overall, though, it's probably better from a general emission standpoint when you include carbon dioxide into that because it's not ancient carbon dioxide, if you will, that's being pulled out of the ground and burned. It's more part of the carbon cycle. So I think from that aspect, it's a lot better.
A lot better. So on average, with an indoor grow, we know we can yield 3 harvests of hemp. Is that pretty true on average with an indoor grow? We can grow 3 harvests in a year with a controlled growing hemp. So,
I mean, I don't know. I'm not on the growing side, but just looking at the numbers, indoor grows are inconsequential if you're looking at producing energy from it. So like an outdoor crop can do, if it's irrigated, up to like about 4 tons of material per acre per harvest. So you're looking at 4,000 pounds, which in the grand scheme of energy, looking at coal or other biofuels, it's not even a drop in the bucket. It's maybe 1 molecule. So to really make an impact on a larger scale, hundreds, actually millions, tens of millions, of hundreds of millions of acres would need to be cultivated to first make a dent. And depending on what comparison you want to make, essentially all the landmass on Earth would have to be utilized to grow hemp to replace some current energy products.
And that goes back to the golden buckshot approach, right? If we're going to utilize especially biomass hemp-based resources to displace petroleum, we need a combination of increased efficiency while decreasing costs. So we need everything to get better and more effective and more efficient and whatever with improved technology while we bring on these alternative sources. And that comes down to everything, right? So one of the things you were asking about was fiber, right? What else can be done with it? Taylor was talking about pellets. We're doing a lot of work where we're looking at using the fiber for reinforcing other structures. So most of our studies with hempcrete were shockingly disappointing on compressive strength and whatever. Great for putting it up as insulation, soundproofing, stuff like that. Kind of joking with Taylor with the room he's in, right? And kind of doing echoing, right? Pun intended. But with that, really, we found that the reinforcing properties of the fiber are great. So we're doing some work with some guys who are doing racing who want to do reinforced fiberglass panels, and they want to make all the panels for the vehicles out of hemp. They want to run the vehicle on hemp fuel. Again, mainly about this awareness. What can it do? How can we do this? How do we get it more efficient? And really, it is about taking these next baby steps, right? This has really been the first year that this has been legal to work with in the United States outside of the Farm Bill as a mass, commodity agriculture crop. And it's going to take a long time to build it up, and really building it up is about this awareness. So anything we can do to increase awareness is going to be absolutely vital for seeing it be folded in and universally accepted as a material, not only for medicine, but for food. And, I've had people ask me, can I get high off eating like a hemp, candy bar? Right. And I'm like, well, no, if we're using hemp protein, you're not going to get high off that or whatever. And so, really that education and awareness is going to be so important. And not only in hemp, but any of the kind of the stuff that we're talking about, any kind of botanical based healing, any kind of encouraging more and more plant-based stuff. Even if you look at plant-based food, right, you look at all the different, vegan foods that are coming out, understanding the technology, all that stuff, so important.
So important. Back to the cars, and I love what you all are talking about. Thank you all for being here with us today. When you spoke about the race car drivers looking for reinforced fiberglass, running on hemp fuel, wasn't one of Henry Ford's first cars made of hemp?
There's lots of discussion about that. We've been working with a guy that we know that we met through LinkedIn. His name's Dan. I can never remember his last name, off the top of my head, unless I pull LinkedIn up. He's based in Kentucky, and he's been doing a lot of, in conjunction with us, what we call the Hemp Mythbusters kind of series, is really trying to figure it out. And actually, there's lots of rumors, but it's really hard to validate all this because we've seen facts that maybe it was made from soy oil and the plastics really weren't from hemp or whatever. And so really it's been interesting because what we need to do is we actually need to piece together the true history of all of this, because I think one of the things that interferes most heavily with adoption in any of this kind of stuff is if an urban legend gets widely accepted and then it gets disproven. And so one important thing for us is to always try to find the facts and dig in with the facts so we can always validate a lot of these claims that are out there to really push the whole industry forward. Because really, if there are enemies to adoption, whether that's petroleum, whether it doesn't matter what you kind of believe on there, it's really having the facts and the truth built in the background to back it all up. It's super important. And that's why I'm big on clinical studies. I'm big on looking at the historical record, all that, because we want to be accurate going forward, because then no one can really argue with it if you actually can like have validated facts to support, I guess, belief and hope in the industry. And I think hope's the most important thing.
Yes, absolutely. Science first. Move forward with that for sure. Taylor, did you have anything to add? We talked about the flower being used for medicine and for seed, the hemp seed oil. We talked about the stalk being used for fiber, built environment, your energy initiatives, the pellets. Can we speak a little bit to the leaves of the hemp plant and also the roots and applications for those?
Yeah, we could mulch it and till it back into the land. We really haven't done much with the plants, or as far as the leaves of the plants, excuse me. What I see most, though, I don't have any firsthand experience, is taking the leaves, and I've heard of a lot of people juicing them and adding that as part of an overall mix of different ingredients for juice, or just doing it by itself. I guess kind of like a sweet grass, or I think there's some grass products that people do with that. So that's what I've heard for the most part. And actually, that did strike a memory. So last fall, we did do some work where we were extracting out the chlorophyll from some muddled leaves to see if we could make a natural base dye. And what we ended up doing was using some algae and then some of the ground up kind of, I think muddled is the right term, hemp leaves, and then pulling that chlorophyll out. And we were able to do some dyeing on it, and it worked at first, but as soon as it got exposed to UV lights, that nice kind of light green, really natural look to it turned into a very unpleasant brown. So we got half the way there. We were able to say, all right, we could make it. We could apply it to different fabrics. It took differently to different fabrics. But there's more work to be done there, like UV stabilization and some stuff like that. But as far as the leaves go, that's all that I've ever personally have dealt with. And then anything with the roots, the farmers I know, they just pretty much leave them in there and just kind of tear it all up and rip it up. I don't know of anyone personally who's done anything other than that with the roots.
So one of the cool things we actually did with the leaf that was it was more a proof of principle. It's not really economically viable, but it was fun, is we took the leaves and we did juice them. And then we actually fermented those leaves to generate ethanol, because they're sugar free in the leaf, to generate ethanol to work on building the fuel for racing cars, right? And so that really came into the whole off-road racing. Obviously, there's more effective technologies and stuff, but it was really about a proof of principle that you can use the whole plant, or we talk about, indigenous traditions and using the whole animal. That was one of the cool things we could do with it, is we're sitting around being like, what do we do with this? We were able to put it back. We've done some work with effectively like kombucha, where you stick the hemp leaves back in and you do that SCOBY, that mixed culture with tea, and do it in there. Does it really have a benefit or a use? It's fun. It's kind of a cool ingredient to put on the label. Is it imparting anything better than like a tea leaf or something? There's probably a lot of science that needs to be done there. On the root side, the work that I've done is not per se the root that you would think of, like, I'm going to harvest the root and use it, right? Like dandelion root or whatever. Really what we've used the root structures for and whatnot is really about bioremediation. And that's probably one of my biggest passions outside of developing ingredients and wellness is, hemp appears to be a tremendously good bioaccumulator. When we do it, we've actually even seen it pull heavy metals out of the ground. When we tested the soil, we couldn't find heavy metals, and boy, did those plants end up with heavy metals in it. So it was getting it from somewhere. in the process that was, you know, and those plants didn't have fertilizer, they didn't have outside input, so they were drawing those impurities out of the soil. And I think that's really where I could see some amazing work being done in recovering brownfields and in urban environments, is really being able to utilize the hemp plant to kind of like restore the health back to the soil. I've also done and seen some work where clones versus seeds. The clones don't generate a deep taproot on the ones that I saw planted versus seeds did. And so if you really want to like disrupt the soil and get down in there and whatever, it really does guide a farmer on, you know, planting strategies and whatever from there as well. I think there's huge advantages to using clones, especially for certain characteristics like cannabinoid content or specific things, because you can make it go from there. And we can go into any details from there, but really that drawing the impurities out of the soil and accumulating them in the plant is something that I'm very fascinated with. And I've done it in other scenarios with other plants and with algae and work to clean up the environment. So I'm really passionate about it. The age-old adage, though, is, okay, once I get it in the plant, what do we do with the plant? So if I pull a bunch of lead or arsenic or selenium or whatever out of the soil and make the soil better, now I have it concentrated in a plant that's not only the plant, but it's full of water. And I'm like, what do we do with this? And where do we go with that? And I think that's, if the listeners are really like, oh my God, I'm really inspired with anything, is if people could develop technologies to take that plant and actually get the impurities out of the plant so it's still useful. So we can go into places like Detroit. We can go into, you know, areas that have, you know, industrial and urban blight and use the plant to recover the economy and generate really good, healthy products from there and do that. I think that's what I'd love to inspire like listeners and whatever, and be like, this is some place that really can go and you could really create something that's going to make a positive impact with the world.
That's brilliant. Yes, indeed. And so it is. Let's move towards that. Science, testing the plant from seed to sale, that we understand that the importance of testing for what you just mentioned, that the plant will draw impurities, mycotoxins, lead, pesticides. So please, listeners, be certain that you're relying, if you're using CBD or any hemp-derived products for your ingestion, as well as your topical, check the lab tests. We really need to have the consumers drive the science behind therapeutic CBD. Lab testing is not an option, it's a requirement. And right now, there's too many companies that do not test their products for consumer safety. Can you gentlemen do that at all?
Yeah, so like we used to have a testing lab. We used to have our own lab that was called Cutthroat Labs that kind of dissolved and we did stuff. It was mainly in nutraceuticals and all that, but we're very familiar, and like a lot of people that are in our partnership, we have a collective of scientists, engineers, artists, and whatever that work with us, and we bring on projects. And so we have a huge knowledge base on this. My juxtaposition with testing, especially in hemp, is, you know, the consumer needs to be super educated on what stuff means. And there's a reason there are legal action limits within each state, because honestly, it's more likely that even the dirtiest hemp product that you buy has less heavy metals in it than the rice you go buy from your shelf and make your next meal with, right? And so there's this weird misunderstanding on a lot of things. And it's actually a burden of the natural products industry, is when stuff is more natural and less processed, it's likely to have those natural impurities from the environment more likely in the product. That doesn't matter whether it's hemp or it's your rice or it's a lotion that you buy that has something. There's this whole kind of realm that there is amounts, and your body actually has the mechanisms to fix a lot of the damage at low levels. So really, it's not about necessarily not getting any heavy metals. That's impossible, right? If you drive a car or you're near a road, if you're not on some isolated mountaintop somewhere or whatever, you're going to get exposed to that. It's a matter of being exposed to the right amounts of that. And really, I think that's where we need a combination of public-private partnership between like citizen activists and citizen scientists and the government and industry, really finding what are, I guess, lack of a better term, appropriate levels for people to be exposed to on a daily basis. Because like for me, I trend towards using natural products, but I also understand that's going to increase my exposure to things like heavy metals and whatever, but it'll decrease my exposure to things like pesticides, right? So if things are being done correctly and like with organic farming techniques and whatever, I'm going to decrease my exposure to pesticides and some other things, plastics, persistent environmental toxins, stuff like that. But I'm likely to increase my exposure to heavy metals. And so this is this thing where there always is this trade-off with it. Indoor grown material that's hydroponically grown is some of the most pristine material, like in hemp and cannabis space, that I've ever tested or seen, because they can control all the factors with it. However, the moment it's mixed into an oil or put into a product or whatever, all that stuff comes back in. So you might have the cleanest hemp or cannabis or whatever in the world that you're working with, but the other ingredients are more likely to actually give more impurities in it than anything else, right? If you eat a bowl of rice when you're taking your CBD drops, or eating whatever, you're likely to actually offset anything and get way more impurities from that than you would have got from even the hemp kind of even grown in a dirty environment, which I think is so funny because no one realizes that.
That's a really interesting perspective, James. I appreciate that.
And then they usually get mad when you tell them that, right? Too. And I'm like, hey, go look at the science on on rice or barley or whatever out there, and be like, oh yeah, or like citrus fruits, even organic ones. Lots of them have stuff in there that you're like, oh man, I didn't realize this was all out there.
Mm-hmm. Right. Continue to detox and still. So do you? I'm curious, gentlemen, when you're shopping, do you look for you as scientists, as inventors in this product space? Do you shop USDA organic? Are you looking for biodynamic farming? What are you looking for as scientists to know that the product has a regulation or a level of testing on consumer goods? Let's stay in the hemp space. What would you look for in a hemp product? What seals, what regulation, what safeguards on quality can we look for?
For me, it's about, I'm a firm believer in authenticity in products. So anything that's farm to processed or traceable, I'm going to be much more likely to use. So if I can tell that it was grown in a farm in, you can get into, a farm. Sorry, I got a text message came through, derailed me. A farm in Montana where I know it was grown in a certain area and I can trace it all the way to the final product. That's what I'm going to look for first, right? Is that traceability, that authenticity. No, I'm going back to helping the community. I tend towards buying organic products personally, more because the USDA organic seal really is about, kind of more traditional practices, no matter what you look at. And I kind of like supporting more traditional farming and heirloom techniques anyways, just because that's what I'm into. And so that's what I trend to, just because of those things, not necessarily a lot of the other things people look for organic, that they're looking for increased nutrient, availability. Mine, it's about being able to figure out, was it a small producer? Where did it get made? All that kind of stuff. Because I'm more interested in the story and the authenticity than I am a lot of the other things.
Yeah, I'd pretty much echo that. For me, the main thing is getting as local as I can. I like to see and believe, so not that I do this, but having the ability to go and look and see, go talk to a farmer, a butcher, a rancher, or whatever, that's typically my go-to to start things out, and just keeping things local and keeping it community-based as much as possible.
And we have a question from Jamie Roche. Do impurities cause less efficacy in products?
The science is probably not completely there, but I guess it depends on what you're looking for. So a great example is a lot of impurities will interfere or cause increased oxidation. So a lot of pesticides interfere with kind of like, that's why you want antioxidants in your diet or whatever, is there are just, certain heavy metals, certain pesticides, interfere with cellular systems. That's how they work. That's why they work. And so, yeah, less, impurities can make certain things that you're looking for less effective. On the juxtaposition, certain impurities can increase things like, the impact of certain compounds, right? So it's more relevant to the cannabis space, but, having solvent in there can actually increase the high you would get from the consumption of THC, because there's these different effects. And so it's weird. You don't want a lot of this stuff in there, but, all the compounds do different things. But generally, I would say if there's an impurity, whether it's a trace solvent, whether it's a pesticide, whether it's a heavy metal in the product, it's likely to impact especially in the wellness category, it's going to do what you don't want to do, right? So while I think it can do different things, the answer to Jamie's question is for wellness and what we're talking about for health, the less impurities, the better we can have in the product, be that a solvent, be a pesticide, be that a heavy metal.
Excellent. And a resource for that, if I might add, there's a website that represents best-in-class CBD products. This is not involved with this company, but I really go to their website as a resource for the purest products because they test. And there's scientists behind this, what do I say, like a collection of the best CBD therapeutic CBD products. That website is truepotency.com. And I'll pop that into the chat as well. True, T-R-U, potency.com. And then another one is Project CBD is a good resource to find out what's happening in the space. And again, some good scientists behind that. James and Taylor, do you have any resources to share with our listeners in terms of finding products with efficacy and science-based tested CBD and hemp?
Yes. So I'm a firm believer is if you believe or you see a claim on something, I'm a firm believer in looking up what's called NCBI. And so it's a database of scientific papers and what is actually peer reviewed, published out there. And so I'll pull up the link and we'll drop it in there on the thing. But that's one I look through first. So if someone claims something does something, you know, on different things, I'll look that up first to see if there's actually any like evidence out there that some scientists have done some work. Now, obviously, it's not the end all be all. Lots of stuff is not peer reviewed, all that from there. But so the NIH, which is a U.S. government agency, has something they call PubMed. So the website's www.ncbi.nlm.nih.gov/PubMed/ From there, I'll look anything up. So pretty much someone's done a study somewhere in the world on any ingredient, any compound. It might not be thick, but you can do it. And that's how I used for a lot of my own kind of guidance or experimentation. What I've learned a lot about what they call athenogenic materials. So these are materials that kind of induce a spiritual event. So it doesn't matter whether it's, you know, CBD, THC, different herbs, different whatever. Everyone experiences them differently. And I think this is the complexity with plant-based healing is you're almost going to have to treat your own body like an experimentation. And so for me, we talked about this before with Kim, is kind of my own wellness journey. I found out last year that I have what's called a histamine sensitivity. I effectively became allergic to everything, but it's not a true allergy. It's a sensitivity to histamine. So I've had to take a lot of histamines, antihistamine compounds to like offset that. And that was causing issues with memory, which is a well-known effect if you take too much antihistamines. And then I started using lion's mane and experimenting with that, which is a type of mushroom. And what I found is it put my brain back into almost like my 20s again. My memory was way sharper, all that kind of stuff. And really, but that required so much experimentation. And like I kept a logbook and really did it like a scientific journey to learn all that. And that's what I tell everybody to do with hemp. Any of these kind of botanical wellness things, you almost need to journal daily, see what your effects are, recover all those effects, and jot it down. Because without journaling and doing this, it's all personalized. And this is really where, you know, botanical solutions have their biggest benefit and their biggest challenge is they are personalized medicine. And you really are going to have to experiment with what you're doing. But that requires a lot of patience and a willingness to try something else. So I always go back to PubMed and say, is there any studies that say like this helps? So like right now, we're doing a lot of work comparing Melissa lemon balm leaf oil and hops extract compared to CBD, because those two components combined should have very similar effects to CBD based on the literature. And we're running those clinical studies on that right now.
That is so interesting. That is so interesting. Lion's mane, hook us up. That's where.
Yeah. Yeah, and really, I've been experimenting with a lot of different. Sorry, my headphones keep falling out. A lot of different brands with that, and really, I found brands matter, right? And so, going back to your true potency and all that, I think it's everything that we're kind of organizing with is super important because you are going to have to experiment with brands, and I think that's where going back to data analysis and community sharing and community reporting of your benefits are super important out there, and there are some organizations that are starting to look at this for hemp, for CBD, for all of these different botanics out there, and gathering this data to really figure out how to shape your, you know, kind of almost crowdsource what might work for you. And so one I'm going to put on in the thing as well as two that I'm affiliated and Taylor affiliated with because they're out of Missoula is, one that's called Aurelius Data, and they're really about gathering patient data and organizing that. And so I'll put their website in the chat bar here in a second as I'm done rambling on and on.
Well, that's such good information. And in terms of aggregating data and that crowdsourcing and the conversation about the efficacy of CBD in brands and personal experience, Brightfield Group. I don't know if you gentlemen ever tune into what they're putting out there, but they are really leading the data charge on aggregating which channels of CBD are most effective, what consumers are saying. They're literally taking information from social media and putting it into their data aggregation as well. And it's called the Brightfield Group.
Yeah, there's a handful of organizations working on it.
You're good. I'm glad.
So Jamie asked a question about what brands do you suggest? And so if you're a big proponent in whole plant medicine and like stuff, the one that I have seen the most interest in, and if you're okay with like it being a crude extract, is Bluebird Botanicals out of Colorado. They have what I would consider a very amazing product. It was very similar to a product I was involved in developing before last year and 2 years ago in conjunction with Montana farmers. It uses crude oil. So it takes the base and minimum extract that you can utilize from the plant and formulate products with it. There's obviously some taste issues and stuff, but from what I've seen and doing data aggregation and stuff, those crude oil products seem to affect people the best. And I do believe because no parts are taken out, it keeps the terpenes in a lot of times. It keeps all the different cannabinoid mixtures or whatever. Obviously, if you're afraid of THC, you most definitely do not want to use a crude oil-based product because you could fail a drug test. Many of them have significant amounts of THC, even though they're legal limits. And so if you're a government employee or anyone who could be drug tested, the hemp and CBD space, it's going to be very, very important for you to pay attention to what you're doing because it could have a very negative effect on your employment or potentially driving or whatever if you do end up in those situations. And that's something where even though it's legal under the Farm Bill and hemp products are allowed, regulatory compliance and at state level has not caught up across the United States nor globally with that. And so being very, very careful in what you consume is going to be absolutely vital.
Okay. Good information. We are at the bottom of the hour, so I will go to Taylor first for your final comments on everything hemp and what people should know.
Yeah, I think at the very fundamental level, there's a lot of potential to be had. And it's good to believe in the potential because believing in that can create a better future. Just don't believe in things blindly. Go through and check what claims people are making. There's different resources to do that, like NCBI when it comes to like medical stuff, or honestly even some Google searches as it relates to things from other industries for that. But we're still in very much the opening stages of this industry and what we can actually do with this particular crop, and really a lot of different plant-based products for that matter. So where we're at now, we're going to continuously be building, continually innovating, bringing costs down, bringing quality up, and making sure that people that want to engage in plant-based, whether it's therapy, food, energy, cosmetics, anything like that, that's coming. It's just a matter of when, not if at this point.
Interesting. It's kind of like every other industry, and this is just opening up. So continue to move forward. And James?
So I think mine is really effectively a call to action to anybody who is interested in the space. We need people to be documenting their positive and negative side effects. We need people to engage with government. The FDA really needs data on people, from users of it, on safety, on blood tests, working with your doctors, being able to share real data, because the real, especially on the cannabinoid science side and the CBD and that aspect, is there is government pushback on general adoption and people being able to use these products. And we really need everyone, brands, scientists, users, doctors, whatever, to effectively kind of overwhelm the FDA with their information. And it needs to be objective information, good and bad, because there are probably people who shouldn't be using CBD for a variety of reasons, right? There are, no matter the compound, there are negative side effects, right? And so we need to understand and do that so we can actually start setting the proper guide limits to the industry and to producers and to farmers and to everybody to really get general adoption. We can talk about all the other things about hemp, the fiber, the stock, the seed, all that. But really, at the end of the day, it's the cannabinoids and effectively, Charlotte's Web and all of that really started this movement moving forward on general acceptance. And we need to be able to give the government the data to say that, yes, this is safe. Or if it's not safe, we need to understand that as well, too.
I think that's interesting. There's not a one fit solution. So people hear buzzwords and they think, oh, that's good for everyone. And it's a little bit more of a complicated process to figure out what's good for you, right?
It's ultra complicated and it's personalized. And what might work for me might not work for you at all.
Right. Interesting. And Ms. Kim Collier?
I am so grateful to James and Taylor for joining us today, and Stephanie for hosting this Green Friday chat on plant-based healing. As a patient and an advocate, working with aspects of cannabis, both marijuana and the hemp aspect and CBD and cannabinoids, I have personally had transformative experiences. And James, to your point, that journaling and documenting and dosing, understanding dosing, my body's reaction, I would say, in speaking to other people that are healing with cannabis as well, less is more, and just start slow and low and definitely document and be open to the healing power of plants. We're having a resurgence, a rediscovery of nature right now as we're in this global situation, coming back to nature. And if we listen and really tune in, we're here to help nature. We're stewards. And so the more that you can get involved, get your hands in the dirt, eat plant-based, try and buy plant-based, go forward with plants. There's something there for everyone. It's so worthwhile for the future as well.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, James. Thank you, Taylor. It was great. Wishing you all a great Green Friday.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. This was excellent. This was an excellent podcast. Thank you very much.
Awesome information.
Excellent. I hope it's useful, and I hope everybody really can get something out of it, even if it's just piqued interest in trying to learn about something new and helping the world innovate.
Absolutely. And catch James and Taylor at 3sickles.com. And you can catch the download of this podcast on CollierConcepts.com, as well as the YouTube for plant-based for Project Positive Planet. Is that right, Stephanie?
Yes, we have a playlist within Well World TV. But I would suggest you go to our Facebook group, which is Project Positive Planet, because we want to hear your stories and what's going on with all of you. So
and I would say, if you want to follow what we do, we're very active on LinkedIn. We do a lot of engagement with the industry, a lot of posting, lots of our experimental data goes up there, lots of our open discussions go up there. And so we're very much engaged in the industry, and LinkedIn is an incredibly open environment to hemp and cannabis. It's been incredibly supportive and has not been blocking information on it like a lot of other social media channels. So we do most of our engagement with the industry and stuff there. And honestly, maybe overly engaged, but I think LinkedIn, you can find me, you can find Taylor there, Kim's on there. It's the especially around hemp and cannabis, the community is incredibly open, supportive, and like very much about like helping each other and kind of innovating together.
Yes. Oh, that's good to know. I didn't know that. And when we initially sent out the invitation, we included both of your links in. So if anybody wants to go back to the initial communication, you can find James, Taylor, and Kim there.
Yes, excellent. Thank you very much. That's awesome.
Pleasure. Yeah. Well, take care, guys. We're going to sign off now. Have a great week.
You as well. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Eat plants.